This is going to be 10 signs that you're dating homosexual house hunter Hakeem. Red flag number one would be telling you what you want to hear. That's why it's so important to know your own strengths and weaknesses, as well as your insecurities. And the beauty is that you don't have to tell a single soul about them. You just have to acknowledge them. And why is that important? Because no one else will be able to love bomb you. Once you acknowledge what your strengths, your weaknesses, and your insecurities are, that's for you to know and for you to do the hard work of doing the work on. You don't have to share that information with anybody, unless it's your therapist. So, love bombing is synonymous with flattery. And there's a difference between a compliment and flattery. Flattery is insincere praise. If a man wants or needs something from you, he's going to be on his best behavior until he gets it. And that includes relentlessly pursuing you. And then when he finally gets you, he begins to abuse you or neglect you, taking you for granted. And the way that they do that is by devaluing you. The time span of that particular cycle depends on that NSP, namely that narcissist, and that source of supply, narcissistic supply. It could be weeks, it could be months, it could be years, it could be decades. But it all starts with love bombing and future faking. So, red flag number 2 would be settling down as soon as possible, suggesting moving in, getting married, attempting to impregnate you very early on in the relationship before you've gotten an opportunity to get acquainted. It takes time to get to know someone. And men generally aren't willing to just give up their freedom like that instantaneously. So when that happens, it's a huge red flag that the relationship is not being paced according to the nature of the relationship. Because if you just met him and he just met you, you don't know each other. So why would somebody be interested in marrying a person that they really don't know? And marriage is supposed to be for life, because you're forsaking all others for your spouse. It's not logical to do that if you haven't taken the time to get to know this person. The other thing is, how does this individual know what type of parent, what type of mother, or what type of father this individual is going to make? So that's a sign that the relationship is not progressing organically at a normal speed. That's indicative of it being this whirlwind sort of romance and both individuals being caught up in the moment as opposed to thinking about the long term. So it's also an indicator that he may not have his own place. A couple moving in together is supposed to be organic as they're planning their future together. And if you already have children, do not expose your children to a man that you don't know or that you're getting acquainted with, because the fact of the matter is that you don't know him. That means he does not meet your children. That includes talk to them. As a single mom or divorcee, keep your dating life and your dating experiences private. Share your dating experiences with other mature, tried, tested, and true girlfriends, immediate or extended family members. And give all of the details of your date's name, location, a photograph, time, phone, and address if possible. If you're going on a date with someone that you've never been on a date before, even in the instance of when you're meeting in a public place, give all of that information to a tried, tested, and true girlfriend, an immediate or an extended family member. God forbid, should they need that information, they'll have it available. Don't think that by dating someone and keeping the relationship a secret in a day of modern technology, we're privy to a lot of stories, a lot of dating horror stories, dating nightmares. So we want to keep that in mind. And again, it would be the date's name, the location that you intend to meet the individual, a photograph, the time that you were supposed to meet the individual, their phone number, and if possible, an address of the location, okay, or that individual's address. I don't suggest that you go to anyone's home if it's an individual that you don't know, and that's for your own protection. Don't leave that information with your children. Not your children. Leave that information with a mature, responsible, immediate or extended family member or a girlfriend. You don't know if this man is safe to expose your children to. Moreover, you don't know if this individual even likes children. A lot of individuals are able to feign love, care, and concern about children, but that doesn't mean that it's genuine. So we're privy to a lot of things and a lot of the opinions that men express about children that are not theirs because of the internet. Keep that in mind as you're dating and getting acquainted with someone. The other thing is that you don't know if this is going to be a short-term relationship or if it's going to be a relationship that you're in for the long term. So you don't want to expose your children to a different men. So another thing, and this is just a sidebar, it's almost like a huge red flag for a homosexual house hunter, Hakeem. And that would be asking, especially if you're talking about a dating app or another social media site where it's known that people meet or hook up with other people, or if somebody slides into your DMs and immediately asks, who do you live with? Okay? And he hasn't even gotten to know anything about you. He may not even know your name, but he's asking where you work, what you do for a living. That's a red flag that somebody's clocking your source of income. Now, it's an ill-fated fact that in 2021, the very attributes that make you, air quotes, wifeable, commitment worthy, those attributes also make you a perfect source of narcissistic supply. So you'll have to be self-disciplined if you're dating with a purpose, a long-term goal. That's the reason you don't want to introduce your children to a man that you haven't heavily vetted. What happens if you see one too many red flags and you've introduced this individual to your children or exposed your children to this individual? And then you start dating again a few months down the line and you've met someone new. The next red flag is going to be he's in search of entertainment, not a commitment. Time is non-refundable. Don't invest. Don't invest too much time, energy, or waste financial resources in a relationship that may only be short term. He should be reciprocating the energy and time you're investing in the relationship. If not, move on. Don't make the mistake of falling for the love bombing phase, and when the mask slips, or when his representative exits stage left and his true character manifests, which is inevitable, you've wasted time and energy waiting for the man you met the acquaintance of, that you fell in love with, to reappear in the relationship, because it's not going to happen. A lot of times, the fear of starting over, because we've started out investing in what we believe would be a long-term relationship with a man that had short-term goals, a relationship of convenience. Okay? Homosexual house hunters are the men that move in without a legal, reliable, verifiable source of income. Okay? Down on his luck.oo is in search of a woman that's going to accept good sex, sexual intercourse in lieu of income. Mutual casual sex is one thing. A monogamous long-term relationship is another. Men that are looking for casual sex do so with the expectation that there will be no strings attached, whether they admit that or not. And they'll start future faking if they believe that's your standard. That means that they'll lie to you about having a future with you in order to have casual sex. It also doesn't mean that he's single. He could be married or in a relationship and cheating. And, of course, if you have your own space, even if you spend the night, leave in the morning, don't get too comfortable. His house, his apartment is his personal space, as yours should be yours. That's how men and women end up in situationships, relationships of convenience. A lot of times now, individuals will move in without even asking permission to move in. They just spend the night and then end up staying indefinitely without an understanding or without consent. So there's sort of this obligation there, or this unspoken understanding. There needs to be clarity and understanding. Moving in with the individual is a big step. You've never lived with this individual before, and a lot of times we don't get to know a lot of quirks and a lot of bad habits and about an individual until we actually do live with them. Okay, so another red flag would be unemployment, chronic unemployment. And this ties in with the who do you live with sort of red flag. A man should have a verifiable income and demonstrate financial independence. So if he doesn't have a history of providing for his material needs independently, consistently, that's a red flag. What's his rental history? Because a man should have his own place, and this allows for you to maintain your separate space and for him to maintain his separate space. So this sort of guarantees that you're not getting into a situationship based on convenience, based on him needing some place to lay his head. So it's relevant what his rental history is. Does he have one? Has he been living with women? Or has he been maintaining his own residence, a separate residence? And that includes family and friends. Now, anyone can experience a financial hardship or crisis. There's a difference between a financial hardship and a crisis and a pattern of being a moocher that lives a parasitic lifestyle. You want to avoid a job hopper. Okay? It's never his fault that he's fired. His boss is always getting on his nerves. There's always some excuse as to why he's fired or why he quits a job. And he doesn't have a history of having a stabilized income because of that. Okay? The only thing he comes with is bad credit and a sad story. Next. So, the next relationship red flag that you could be dating a potential homosexual house hunter is check his relationship resume and cover letter for baby mamas, child support arrears, cheating on his ex-wife, fiance, girlfriend, baby mama. That's relevant because has he learned anything from it? And one of the hugest red flags for the way a man is possibly going to treat you is determining, but it's always a red flag for a man to speak negatively about his exes. If, for instance, if he cheated in the relationship and the relationship failed as a result of his infidelity, but he doesn't accept accountability for the role that he played in the infidelity, and he's blaming it all on the other person. If a man badmouths his ex, the rule of thumb is that you're next. When you come into a relationship, if an individual is incessantly talking about their ex, that's usually a huge red flag for the fact that they're not over that relationship or they're not over that individual. When they're talking about an ex, it should be along the lines of what they took away from that relationship, what the takeaways were from that relationship. I don't think that any of us would want to go on a date and the only thing the individual did while we were on that date was incessantly talk about their ex. That's indicative of that individual not being emotionally available. Because the focus is supposed to be on the individual that you're dating, the individual that you're actually in the company of. that you're supposed to be enjoying the company of. So if an individual is ruminating about their ex incessantly, especially in a negative fashion, that's a huge red flag that you could be dating somebody that's potentially on the rebound from a relationship and they have yet to work out those issues. So leave them to do just that. And it's very relevant whether you're of child rearing age or not. If an individual has child support arrears, pending child custody battles, pending divorces, first of all, an individual that's separated is not divorced. And an individual that has a pending child custody case, I would think that as opposed to dating, they would be focused on the child custody. Okay? Deadbeat, an individual having a history of being a deadbeat is very relevant because it bleeds into other areas of their life. That's a vicious cycle that doesn't change. If a man does not believe it is his financial and moral obligation to financially support his child or his children and actively co-parent with the mother, even if he has to use the family courts to do so without her interference, with him co-parenting his child or his children, if he doesn't think that that's his responsibility and his obligation, don't think that you getting pregnant by him is going to change. It's not going to change that. That's a mentality. That's a mindset. What you'll be doing is starting the countdown to you actually being in his baby mama's shoes. The other thing, the next red flag, a lot of times we don't think it's relevant, but it actually is relevant. And it's not necessarily a deal breaker, but it is something that we need to pay attention to determine whether or not an individual is actually relationship ready, if they're ready to be actually dating, or if they're a healthy person for us to date. And that is listening very closely to what an individual's family of origin is. If they have a fucked up family of origin, if they have a fucked up circle of friends, okay? His friends, birds of a feather, flock together. Observe, observe, observe. Okay, you cannot take their word, okay, for what their family of origin is. That's the reason why you need to observe, observe, observe. Because people lie. They lie to deceive. However, they also lie because they're in denial. Some people will present an image of their family of origin. However, when you look at the dynamics, when you're actually observing as you're dating their circle of friends and the dynamics between them and their family of origin, often there'll be a contradiction. So sometimes, because our families of origin shape our personalities and shape our perception of the world, it's important to pay attention to that, because a lot of those are also, that's also a mindset that could bleed over into a relationship, and certain problems can manifest in the relationship because of issues that an individual is struggling with as a result of them having a dysfunctional family of origin. So it's not necessarily a deal breaker if the individual is actively working on those issues. If they're putting forth a genuine effort to work out those issues, it's not necessarily a deal breaker. However, that's totally up to the individual that they're in a relationship with. Okay? But he may have unfinished business that may interfere with his ability to be a good man to you if he has not resolved those issues. Okay? It's not your job, just like it isn't a man's job to parentify us as women. It's not our job or our responsibility or our obligation to reparentify a grown man. if he's controlling of your time and of your energy. He's very demanding of your time and your energy. They don't want you to have a social life. They don't want you to have friends, and they're jealous and envious of your family and your friends, immediate and extended family and friends, because what will happen is that they'll seek to destroy those relationships and isolate you away from a support system. That's always a huge red flag. You should have a separate social life, and an individual that you're in a relationship with should have their own separate social life and social circles. He needs to have his own friends, and you need to have your own friends. There shouldn't be interference unless in the instance of when those friendships are inappropriate or of an intimate nature. If you're actually in an exclusive relationship, that sort of ties into red flag number 6, and that would be jealousy and insecurity. Okay, a man is supposed to be confident enough to know that if he's meeting the needs of his woman, no other man can take her from him. It's not your job to parentify a grown man. You cannot, no matter how much you want to, be the woman his mother wasn't. And he'll punish you for it. Okay? Narcissists don't have significant others. They have insignificant others. If an individual without a valid reason, sometimes there's a valid reason for jealousy. Like in the instance of the next red flag, when an individual is triangulating, that is designed to create jealousy. But if there is no legitimate reason for a person to be jealous and pathologically jealous and envious in a relationship, that's a red flag. It's a red flag for either partner to be pathologically jealous and envious when there's no valid reason for that. But sometimes there is a reason for the jealousy, or something that's creating an insecurity in the significant other, and that's in the instance of when it's an NSP and they're triangulating intentionally. It's designed to create a jealousy and an insecurity, or a level of uncertainty in their significant other, and they do that very intentionally. As a matter of fact, that's the whole purpose of them doing it. It's a psychological mind fuck, a psychological mind game. Okay, now triangulation is at the slightest inclination of an individual triangulating, cut him off, period. Let him play those psychological mind games with someone else. Now, what is triangulation? Triangulation, it requires 2 or more individuals. And because we're talking about dating, it may be 1 or more women. Okay, however, nappy-headed NSPs don't limit the mind fuck of a triangulation to just women that they're either currently or formerly involved with intimately. It may be any interpersonal relationship. It could be an extended or an immediate family member. It could be a coworker. It could be a neighbor. Okay? It's not just limited to his. It's not just limited to his family. He'll do it with yours too. Okay? Yes, they will triangulate with your BFFs, immediate or extended family, neighbors, co-workers, and the purpose is to create chaos, insecurity, jealousy, envy, and inadequacy. Okay? In you about your relationship. Now, it may be real or it could be invented. Okay? It's a form of seed planting with a nefarious intent. An example would be initiating flirting or inappropriate behavior for the nature of the relationship. Okay? For example, if you're in an exclusive relationship and then claiming that she initiated the flirtation, but telling you not to confront her about it. Okay? Or telling you that his family member or friend doesn't like you. Now, that may or may not be true. But the reason they're telling you that is to drive a wedge between you and another individual so that there's a breakdown of communication so that they'll be able to play both ends against the middle. That's what triangulation is. Okay, but it puts the power dynamic in the other person that's doing the triangulating and the seed planning's court, because they're causing a breakdown in communication between you and that other individual. So you don't even know that there's a problem. Okay? And that's done intentionally, like I said, for the specific purpose of creating chaos and confusion and causing a conflict between two individuals. Okay, now this red flag is going to be Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde like behavior. And he's one way in public. And it's like he has split personalities, because when you're behind closed doors in privacy, he becomes abusive. And that's whether it's verbally abusive, emotionally abusive, physically abusive, and physically also includes sexually. Or he's financially abusive, or he uses spirituality as a way to become abusive. And when they're using spirituality to become abusive, they'll manipulate religious doctrine or religious dogma in order to get you to do something that they want you to do, or to act in the way that they want you to act, or to acquiesce to what it is that he wants you to do. But it's a twisting. It's sort of a perverted twisting of the religious doctrine. If it's financial abuse, they may take all of your money, or they may leave the burden on you, whereas he may very well have the financial means to contribute to the household expenses, to the family's expenses, or to the couple's expenses. Nonetheless, he'll leave the responsibility or put the pressure on the spouse or the fiance or the mother of the child or the girlfriend to cover all of the household expenses. That may result in her working overtime, being physically and emotionally exhausted from working so much to pay all of the couple's expenses. That's an example of it. And then having a public appearance as if he is a provider for the family and for the family's expenses, but using his resources to buy toys, adult toys, cars, clothes, jewelry, things to, it's always going to be things that are for his benefit, things that he wants to buy, but he may restrict you from buying certain things, but it'll be your money. But he'll put you on a budget with your own money, or use the family's resources to be able to maintain control over whether or not you buy yourself clothes, whether or not you can get your hair done, get your nails done, not just whether or not you can buy an outfit, but if you can buy anything for yourself. So that's a form of financial abuse. Now, the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde personality relates to a man that's one way in public And it's like he has split personalities, because when you're behind closed doors and privacy, he becomes very abusive. He may verbally assault you by telling you that you're unattractive, and then telling you how attractive he finds other women. He may name a specific woman, or he may speak about other women in general, but he's explicitly describing what he would like to do to different women sexually, and then call you jealous and insecure when you have a reaction to him being emotionally abusive, telling you that you're insecure, or calling you a whore, and accuses you of cheating on him, flirting with other men, and you haven't. But in public, he brags about what a good woman you are. Okay? Another way is that he intimidates you into engaging in degrading or painful sexual acts that you're not comfortable with. And then when you refuse, or when you resist in any shape, form, or fashion, he again becomes verbally and emotionally abusive. He may become physically abusive to you when you refuse to. Or he'll begin to triangulate by throwing other women in your face that have either done these things for him in the past, or that he could get to do those things for him. That's another form of triangulation, playing both ends against the middle. Now, you have the right to refuse sex, as well as a sex act that you dislike or that causes you pain, that you don't enjoy. Sex is supposed to be mutually gratifying. So that's another red flag. When someone is pressuring you to do things that you've verbally expressed that you're not comfortable with doing, or they're attempting to coerce you into doing things, and you shouldn't have to repeat more than once if you're not interested in something, and that's whether it relates to a sex act or anything. You shouldn't have to repeatedly or redundantly repeat that you're not comfortable with doing something, or that you don't like something, or that something causes you pain, or that you're not comfortable with something. If you don't like something, you don't like it. If you hate something, you hate it. If you enjoy it, you enjoy it. If you love it, you love it. If you don't, you don't. It's a red flag anytime you have to repeatedly reinforce your boundary. And the reason why it's important to pay attention to that, because very early on in relationships, narcissists test your boundaries. They will intentionally attempt to violate a boundary to basically see how you react to that boundary violation. But they'll feign ignorance, or feign that they've forgotten about you saying that you didn't like something, or that you didn't want to do something. And then at a later point in time, after they've successfully love bombed you, what they'll start to do during the devaluation phase is begin to test your boundaries to see if they can coerce you into doing things that you said that you didn't want to do, or that you weren't open to doing. And that gives them a lot of power and control in the relationship. Say, for instance, if initially you weren't open to a particular sex act during the time that they were love bombing you, like when you first got into the relationship, and then after the love bombing stops and you're going into the devaluation phase of the relationship where they start with the intermittent reinforcement, giving you 20% positive and 80% negative. But it's the 20% of the positive that keeps you there, because at that point, the woman is still believing that she's actually in a relationship with a man who presented himself in the very beginning, the man that she met and fell in love with. That's the idea of him that she's holding on to, even though he's began to be abusive. And it doesn't have to be overt abuse. A lot of times, emotional abuse isn't overt abuse. It's very covert. That's why they use the analogy of the frog being put in the lukewarm water and the flame being turned up ever so slightly. Because by the time the frog realizes that he's in a pot on a stove being cooked, he's already dead. By the time it becomes evident that he's being cooked alive. So it happens very subtly. So that's why it's important to pay very close attention, and especially for HSPs, highly sensitive people, to trust your instincts. That's why I said to take note of what you see, but pay even closer attention to what you sense. Because a lot of times, narcissists will do things that are very passive aggressive. They'll give you backhanded compliments. And that's what they refer to as negging. That's also intermittent reinforcement, where they'll say something positive, but they'll give you a compliment, but at the same time, you're questioning whether or not at the end of what's supposed to be a compliment, if it was intended to offend you or if it was an insult. If someone is giving you a compliment, you shouldn't have to wonder whether or not it was an insult. So that's the type of stealth, covert, passive aggressive, nice, nasty, intermittent reinforcement that narcissists engage in. And that's also a way for them to test whether or not you have a high tolerance for abuse. And it's extremely critical for women that are coming from families of origin, or where there was abuse and dysfunction, or if you're coming out of a relationship that was abusive, because you've already been psychologically conditioned and groomed to fit like a glove into another relationship with another abuser. It's like the elephant in the circus that no longer has the chain around the ankle. And because elephants have the memory that they do, even though the chain is not there, they still remember the chain being there. So even when the chain is no longer on their ankle, keeping them in place, they'll continue to act as if the chain were in place. Or your boundaries. As a matter of fact, when you're talking about narcissistic individuals, you're talking about individuals that are narcissistically injured at even the suggestion that you have boundaries or that you have limits. And the reason why it's important to pay attention to that, because very early on in relationships, narcissists test your boundaries. They will intentionally attempt to violate a boundary to basically see how you react to that boundary violation. But they'll feign ignorance or feign that they've forgotten about you saying that you didn't like something or that you didn't want to do something. And then at a later point in time, after they've successfully love bombed you, what they'll start to do during the devaluation phase is begin to test your boundaries to see if they can coerce you into doing things that you said that you didn't want to do, or that you weren't open to doing. And that gives them a lot of power and control in the relationship. Say, for instance, if initially you weren't open to a particular sex act during the time that they were love bombing you, like when you first got into the relationship, and then after the love bombing stops and you're going into the devaluation phase of the relationship, where they start with the intermittent reinforcement, giving you 20% positive and 80% negative. But it's the 20% of the positive that keeps you there, because at that point the woman is still believing that she's actually in a relationship with a man who presented himself in the very beginning, the man that she met and fell in love with. That's the idea of him that she's holding on to, even though he's began to be abusive. And it doesn't have to be overt abuse. A lot of times emotional abuse isn't overt abuse. It's very covert. That's why they use the analogy of the frog being put in the lukewarm water and the flame being turned up ever so slightly. Because by the time the frog realizes that he's in a pot on a stove being cooked, he's already dead. By the time it becomes evident that he's being cooked alive. So it happens very subtly. So that's why it's important to pay very close attention, and especially for HSPs, highly sensitive people, to trust your instincts. That's why I said to take note of what you see, but pay even closer attention to what you sense. Because a lot of times narcissists will do things that are very passive aggressive. They'll give you backhanded compliments. And that's what they refer to as negging. That's also intermittent reinforcement, where they'll say something positive, but they'll give you a compliment, but at the same time, you're questioning whether or not at the end of what's supposed to be a compliment, if it was intended to offend you or if it was an insult. If someone is giving you a compliment, you shouldn't have to wonder whether or not it was an insult. So that's the type of stealth, covert, passive-aggressive, nice, nasty, intermittent reinforcement that narcissists engage in. And that's also a way for them to test whether or not you have a high tolerance for abuse. And it's extremely critical for women that are coming from families of origin, or where there was abuse and dysfunction, or if you're coming out of a relationship that was abusive, because you've already been psychologically conditioned and groomed to fit like a glove into another relationship with another abuser. It's like the elephant in the circus that no longer has the chain around the ankle. And because elephants have the memory that they do, even though the chain is not there, they still remember the chain being there. So even when the chain is no longer on their ankle, keeping them in place, they'll continue to act as if the chain were in place. If you're not dealing with an individual that's emotionally available in a relationship, the only needs that'll ever be met will be his. Those are the only needs that'll matter. And that's a one-sided relationship. Relationships require reciprocity. So there you have it, ladies. 10 of the nappy-headed NSPs that I want you to take a hiatus to heal from, allowing access to you and your life. Avoid at all cost. You want healthy interpersonal relationships, not picture perfect interpersonal relationships, but healthy relationships. Thanks for watching. Take care.